After taking 4 weeks off from cash games since the birth of my son, it's time to get back in the water, and we're not just dipping our feet in. I'm jumping into the deep end, and there are plenty of hungry sharks chomping at the bit, eagerly awaiting my return to Bobby's room after I lost over $23,000 in my previous cash game session there. I was tired and played one of the worst few hours of poker in my life. I'm a bit tired today, but I'm out for vengeance, and I've got a game plan. I buy in for $10,000 to start, rather than my usual $15,000 to mitigate the downside. It'd be nice to get a few easy buckets early, but the lineup doesn't look particularly good this morning. It's six-handed and all pros at the moment. Hopefully some non-pros will fill up the empty seats. We begin play at 10:02 in the morning. Shortly into it, we're dealt Jack-7 suited in the big blind. A well-known high-stakes player raises to 150 from under the gun. We can't pass up an opportunity to play suited cards that have a possibility of making a straight. We're also getting a nice discount. I call for 100 more to see a flop. The dealer puts out 9-5-5 with 2 diamonds. We've got a flush draw, 1 over, and a backdoor straight draw. I checked in the initial pre-flop raiser, expecting to see a small bet at a high frequency since the opponent tends to be extremely aggressive. Surprisingly, he checks back rather quickly. The turn is the 3 of diamonds. The Mario Brothers and I know that if we're getting flushes, it's time to charge our customers. I bet 400. It's over a pot-sized bet. The opponent checks for a diamond. Under the gun is at least going to pretend like he likes what he saw. He calls, sending us to the river. It's the 4 of spades. It's a brick. After all the bluffs that I pulled in the last session with big bets, I attempt to balance the scales as I announce a wager of 1,500. The chips never make it to the felt because the opponent folds immediately. We start out on the right foot, winning several hundred. I only need to recover about 23,000 more. A bit later, we're dealt red kings on the button. Under the gun raises to 150, teeing it up for us to come in with a 3-bet. I re-raise to 500. The opponent won't be folding too many hands after raising from under the gun since he's typically going to have a narrow opening range with a lot of combos that can play well post-flop. Under the gun calls. It's the same player that I unsuccessfully bluffed in the prior vlog. I bet pot on the turn and overbet pot on the river, only to get called by a flopped set of 5s that was downgraded when flush and straight draws were completed. It's time to get revenge. The flop comes Queen 6-3 all clubs. Even when the ace doesn't get magnetized, the deck finds a way to make things uncomfortable since we don't have a club in our hand. Under the gun checks. On monotone boards with a high card accounted for, it's tough for me to have too many flushes. Because of that, checking or betting small are both reasonable options. I bet 400. The opponent checks his cards for a puppy foot. It's possible that he's got one. He calls. The turn is the 7 of diamonds. It's relatively blank. Under the gun checks. My sense is that we've got the best hand. We can't allow the opponent to see a free card because if he's on a naked flush draw, he likely won't be putting any more money in the pot on the river unless he improves to beat us. We need to charge him now before it's too late. I bet 1100. Under the gun still likes his hand enough to see one more card. Without thinking for too long, he calls. We really don't want to see a club come out on the river. Guess what it is? It's the King of Spades giving us top set. It's the only card in the deck that significantly improves our hand without adding another club to the situation. Vegas doesn't need any more clubs. And to be honest, the situation should probably be kept as far from clubs as possible. He's pretty old now. Under the gun checks. This is set up nicely. We're against an opponent who I somewhat recently got caught bluffing big against on a similar board, and to make things better, the King of Clubs isn't accounted for, so it's possible that the opponent has something like Ace-King offsuit with the King of Clubs. There's over 4,000 in the middle. I've got about 8,000 in my stack. I jammed 2x pot for value to play into the dynamics between me and the opponent a little.
Still not making a move, but
the opponent shows the ace of clubs as he folds. He was on a draw that missed. It would have been more fun to bet smaller and see if he actually would have made a move like he said he was contemplating. Still nice to win a solid pot and keep the momentum on our side. We're at least already up 2,400. Next we've got King Queen suited under the gun. When we're playing from early position, it's good to use smaller raise sizes because with lots of opponents behind us, one or more of them might wake up with a monster. I raised to 125. The player on our immediate left calls and then puts in a very disrespectful smack on our top chip to knock it off the bottom chip. There's no evidence suggesting that the chip did anything to the opponent. The action's on the cutoff. He 3-bets to 600. This is the extremely aggressive opponent that I referenced in the first hand that we went over. We've got a strong combo. I call for 475 more. The hijack is getting a good price to hang in there, plus he's closing the action. He calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop out of position. Comes ace jack 6 with 2 hearts and a spade. We don't have much except a Broadway draw. It isn't even a clean draw with the heart draw out there. I check with intentions of giving up if we face a reasonable bet. The hijack checks as well. The cutoff knows that this is a good flop for his range with multiple high cards out there. He bets 350. It's less than 20% pot. This doesn't qualify as a reasonable bet. I call one time to see if we can improve. The hijack may have a similar game plan. He calls as well. All of us are still in. The pot is increasing. And the 10 of spades comes out on the turn, giving us the nuts. It's a beautiful card to see. I check. With any luck at all, one of our two opponents will fire and we can put in the check raise with our sneaky straight. The hijack checks. We're down to one last chance of having the opponent make our day. The cutoff is too crafty. He checks back, disappointing me more than the ending of Lucky You. I mean, who mucks the winning hand to their dad with 3 left in the main event just to see their dad bust out in second? Stupidest collusion I've ever seen. The river is the deuce of spades. We're slightly downgraded because the backdoor flush draw gets there, but there's no real reason to put anyone on the backdoor flush. We can't allow this to check through again. I bet 1300. It's not all that large of a sizing. It's possible that the hijack mistakenly equates our less than half size pot bet as weakness. He comes in with a large raise to 5800. The cutoff has nothing. He quickly folds. It's decision time for us. And this isn't a fun decision like deal or no deal in which we'd walk away with money no matter what. If we make the wrong choice here, we could lose an additional 4,500. Is it possible that the opponent is value betting with worse? It's hard to tell with that sizing. It feels like he might have the same hand or potentially a flush. The ace of spades isn't accounted for. A straight is just too strong to fold. I keep him honest and I punish myself. I call. The opponent has ace-5 of spades for the nuts. He got the perfect run out to cause me maximum pain. This is the exact type of situation that I was fearing going into the session, which is why I only bought in for 10,000. Sometimes losing money is avoidable. Maybe I could have lost less in this instance, but this was set up for me to at least lose 4 figures. It's frustrating to erase today's profit and add to the deficit over the last 2 sessions. I try to forget about it. As I add on for 10,000 more, I'm in for 20,000 total. Less than 10 minutes later, we're dealt a little ace-5 suited of our own. We're in the hijack and we're ready to get back on the saddle. I raised to 125. The cutoff is the opponent with a lot of our chips in his stack. He immediately 3-bets to 400. Ace-5 and ace-4 suited are hands that will regularly play like aces, especially when we're out of position. Those combos do well on both low and high boards, and they have the ability to make the nuts, as we just saw. Some of the time I'll just flat the 3-bet to see a flop, but after randomizing and getting the green light to be aggressive, I 4-bet to 1300 to win this without seeing a flop at all. Or with seeing a flop. The cutoff doesn't let go of its cards. He calls for 900 more. We might be in trouble as we're heads up with a lot of money already in the middle. The flop comes ace-6-3 with 2 spades. We've at least got top pair and a backdoor straight draw. There's a high probability that we're either in great shape or in terrible shape. Ace-high flops are good for our range, even when we're 4-bet bluffing pre-flop, as exemplified by this hand. I significantly down-bet to 700 in order to target the opponent's medium to high pocket pairs below an ace. Folding when getting 5-1 isn't something that anyone wants to do with any 2 cards, including the cutoff. He calls to advance. It still isn't clear whether or not we've got the best hand. The turn is the deuce of diamonds. We pick up the straight draw, and it's unlikely that the deuce helped the opponent. What I don't want is for this pot to balloon out of control relative to the strength of our hand. The goal is to get to showdown. I check. The cutoff seemingly has the same goal as us. He checks back. If he had a strong ace, he'd have probably bet. The fact that he didn't leads me to believe that our pair with no kicker could be best. The river is another 3, pairing the board. I don't want to give the opponent an opportunity to check back again. I bet 1100. This is a dual purpose bet. If we get raised, we know that we can fold, being fairly certain that we're beat, and we cap our loss at 1100 on this street. If we happen to have the best hand, which I suspect, we might be able to extract some extra money here. After 20 seconds, it looks like a miniature human in a wingsuit crash lands on the felt, but don't be alarmed, that's just the cutoff folding his cards. Our aggressive line works out for us this time. We win quite a bit more than we would have if we didn't 4-bet pre-flop. A good chunk of our chips return to their home. We get a much needed confidence and morale boost as we climb closer to even. In this one, we look down at King-Queen offsuit in the big blind. The middle position player across from us raises to 150. We've gone to battle a few times with him already today and in previous episodes. I call for 100 more, we're heads up out of position, the flop comes Jack, Jack, Jack. It's not typically a flop that'll favor us since we don't have high pocket pairs in our range. I check, our opponent doesn't skip a beat, he reaches for his stack and makes a small bet of 75. I don't like the idea of folding 2 overs in this situation, and we're getting a great price and have removal to high pocket pairs. I call to see the turn. The dealer must know it's my birthday coming up in about 8 months because he puts out the king of spades, giving us a full house. I check, the opponent knows that an additional face card will often be better for him. He takes a little longer this time before betting 200. There's no reason to raise in this instance because we could still be losing to quads or pocket aces. We also don't want hands worse than ours folding. We want to keep the opponent's bluffs in. I call, mostly for deception. It could look like we're getting sticky with a small to medium pocket pair that might fold to a third barrel. The river is the 9 of clubs, it doesn't change anything. I check with plans to call almost no matter how much the opponent bets. If he goes extra large, we could be chopping or potentially losing. I mentioned previously that this opponent is aggressive. I wasn't lying. He empties the clip with a bet at 2,700. It's almost 3 times the size of the pot. I'm not going anywhere. I call immediately. We make a lot of money because the opponent reveals that he was trying to win with 7 deuce of hearts. If he got the bluff through, he would have won an extra 200 from each player at the table, but instead, he punishes himself. We take down a big pot that we ordinarily wouldn't have if the 7 deuce game wasn't on. The very next hand, we're dealt Jack 10 offsuit in the small blind and a $200 bomb pot with 6 players going directly to the flop. It comes Jack 10 deuce with 2 diamonds. We've got top 2 pair. It checks to the hijack. He bets 300. The cutoff calls. The action's back on us. There are only 5 total combos to have us beat since we have removal to 2 different sets. This is kind of a tricky spot though because there are a lot of cards that can come out that'll downgrade us. Diamonds are bad, overcards are bad, and there are tons of turns that'll complete at least 1 straight draw. I raised to 2,000 to pile money in and possibly win without having to see any more cards. The opponent under the gun, who just tried to bluff us with 7 deuce, may have revenge mode activated. He originally checked, now he shockingly cold calls our check raise. This is something that I absolutely didn't expect. It's tough to put him on any particular hand, but he likely has a massive draw of some sort, or he's going to try to outplay me. If he had a set or some other made hand, he'd probably re-raised rather than call and give strong draws behind him a chance to call while getting an enticing price. But under the gun, could just be playing tricky with the nuts, or maybe even the same hand as us. The hijack and cutoff fold, leaving it down to us and the under the gun player squaring up for back-to-back big pots. The turn is the 8 of spades, completing a few straights. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it or how to proceed. I check to see what the opponent wants to do since his cold call of our check raise on the previous street is incredibly strong. There's a slight chance that he could have called with an open-ender like Queen 9 or a combo like 9-7 of diamonds. Fortunately, the opponent checks back, indicating that he doesn't have a straight. The river is the ace of clubs, completing the Broadway draw and downgrading us to middle 2 pair instead of top 2 pair. At this point, the pot has gotten massive compared to the strength of our hand when we went 6 ways to the flop. We're not quite strong enough to bet again for value and then call a raise, but it's vitally important for us to get to showdown in order to give ourselves a chance to win the pot. I check. Our opponent doesn't make things easy on us. There's 5,800 in the middle. We've got a little over 15,000 in our stack. The opponent has us covered. He puts us to the ultimate test. We're facing an overbet jam of almost 3 times the size of the pot in a nosebleed game inside of Bobby's room with a hand that isn't close to the nuts. This bet is so big, our 2 pair has been reduced to a bluff catcher because there aren't any hands that our opponent would have bet this much with for value that we're beating. We just caught this exact same player overbet bluffing huge on the river the hand right before this one. Is he steaming and trying to get one through on us again? Or does he actually have it this time? I almost ruled out the opponent having a set on the flop, but maybe he has something like aces to get there on us. He could have river top 2 pair with ace jack, or maybe he has ace 10 of diamonds. He's mostly representing a straight, but I'm not certain that he would have cold called or check raise on the flop with the straight draw when there's a flush draw out there, so he'd probably need to have king queen of diamonds to have a straight in this situation. What types of hands does he think that we have that we'd play this way? Our middle 2 pair looks kind of face up when we check turn and check again on the river. It appears like we have something decent, but not the nuts, and we want to get to showdown for a reasonable price. Then all of a sudden, under the gun rips it for a ridiculous amount. If he knows that we can't call a massive sizing, Why would he make it so large if he's truly betting for value? Maybe he's bluffing and he thinks that I don't have the guts to call light. I'm taking my time to think this through. I already called one large bet on the river that was incorrect. I really don't want to do it again. I also lost over $23,000 in the previous session. I don't want to call and be wrong, causing me to lose another $20,000 in my first cash game session back. Something just doesn't feel right. After a minute and a half of tanking, I go with my instincts and I make the call. There's no sigh or look of embarrassment as if I caught the opponent trying to make a move. He rolls over 2 face cards quickly. As you might have guessed by now, the opponent has King Queen. He destroys me as I make one more bad call, losing the absolute maximum when I didn't have to. Except it's not King Queen that we're up against. The opponent has pocket queens. We reveal our 2 pair. It's the winner in a pot over $36,000. Our instincts don't lead us astray. The hero call allows us to win huge. We catch our opponent overbet bluffing 2 hands in a row. To his credit, he put us to a very difficult decision representing the nuts that he had double removal for. Feels good to win this one. If we'd lost, my confidence would have dropped and I probably would have called it a day. Right now I'm feeling great though. We've turned the session around. We're currently up over $16,000. There have been a ton of interesting situations and we're just getting started. Shortly after, it's our turn for pocket queens. We're under the gun. I raised to 125. The hijack calls. The big blind also calls. We're going 3 ways to the flop. It comes King 4 deuce rainbow. The big blind checks. King high flops are decent for us. We probably have the best hand. I'll mix in betting or checking, but this time I bet 150. I wouldn't be upset if we won without resistance or if we get the hijack to fold so we can at least play in position against the big blind. It's not quite what happens. The hijack calls. The big blind isn't as interested. He folds. We're heads up out of position with second pair. I'm not loving the situation that we found ourselves in, at least until the dealer puts out the queen of spades on the turn. We've got the second nuts. Now I'm hoping that the opponent has a king or a lower set. I check to give him the opportunity to bet. The hijack makes it 300. There are a couple draws out there and we're playing deep. Similar to the Olsen twins, I'm not going to get any cuter. I raised to 1300 in order to charge the opponent extra if he wants to see the river. He doesn't have the type of hand that he was pretending to. After only a few seconds, the hijack folds. It's another pot that's coming our way. We're finding a nice rhythm in a difficult lineup as our stack approaches the $40,000 mark. There's no break for us. We look down at 7 deuce offsuit in the cutoff. I raised to 150. The opponent who we caught overbet bluffing a couple times calls in the big blind. We're heads up in position. The flop comes 9-4-3 with 2 diamonds. We've got nothing. The big blind checks. I'm hoping he doesn't have much either. I bet 225. If we win, we'll get everything in the middle plus an additional 1400. The big blind plays defense and calls. The turn is the 8 of diamonds, completing the flush draw. The big blind will have lots of suited combos, but we'll have quite a few ourselves when we open from late position. The big blind checks. It's possible that we can get him off some small pairs. The extra value that we can get from winning with 7 deuce is enough to incentivize us to go for a bluff one more time. I bet 700 to put a lot of pressure on the opponent. The big blind folds immediately. We turn over the worst hand in poker in order to collect the $200 bonus from our 7 opponents at the table. We're on a roll. It's nice to be in the midst of a big winning session with almost everything going well in a high stakes game, especially after being stuck about 5,000 early on. The next hand we're dealt pocket 10s in the hijack. Under the gun raises to 150. When we're facing a raise from early position, we won't be 3-betting nearly as much, even with high pocket pairs. I call. The big blind calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. The dealer puts out 6-6-3 rainbow. We've got an overpair to the board. Checks to us. There are a number of bad turns that'll downgrade us. We can't let our opponent see a free card. I bet 200 for value. We don't have to risk much in order to clear out some equity. The opponent who will have the most trip combos in his range is the big blind. He calls, which is somewhat worrisome. Under the gun folds. It's down to heads up. The turn is the 8 of hearts. The big blind checks. We don't want this pot to get out of control. I check back. The river is the king of hearts. We no longer have an overpair, but given the action, the king is actually kind of a blank. There aren't many combos that the big blind would have called our flop bet with, containing a king that stole the lead. Maybe he could have something like king 3 or another low king that had backdoor straight and flush possibilities. That's kind of it though. The big blind reps trip 6s or better as he makes close to a pot size bet of 900. I don't hesitate. I call knowing that I didn't check back turn to fold to a river bet. The big blind shows that he tried to get a bluff through with 4 deuce of spades. He had a gut shot straight draw that missed, and no way to win at showdown. We pick off another bluff. Big pots keep coming in our direction. The day couldn't be going much better than this. We're up about 20,000 at the moment. We have a bit of a lull before we're dealt pocket queens in the cutoff with a rare stand-up game going. I'm one of the few remaining players still standing. I raised to 300. Everyone at the table knows that I need to win a pot soon, or I'll have to pay each player at the table $200. It's great to pick up a premium hand and raise larger than normal with it. The small blind attempts to push me around with a 3-bet to 1500, thinking that I'm opening a wide range from late position with incentive to take down the pot. We're playing 600 big blinds effective. I'm not going with a small 4-bet. I re-raised to 5,000. The small blind folds right away. I have to show our queens face up in order to take a seat. It isn't a huge pot, but it allows us to cross the $40,000 mark for the first time today. 5 minutes later, we're dealt 7 deuce offsuit under the gun +1. Under the gun raises to 200. I go the aggressive route and 3-bet to 700 in order to win this pre-flop, or see a flop heads up in position against the initial pre-flop raiser. Under the gun calls for 500 more. The flop comes 8-7-3 with 2 clubs. We've got middle pair. Under the gun checks. He's down quite a bit today and doesn't seem to be in the folding mood. We've got a hand with a decent amount of value that we don't necessarily need to bluff with anyway. I check back. The turn is the 6 of clubs. We don't have a flush draw. Under the gun checks again. I've got more confidence that we've got the winner, but still don't see much purpose in betting when we don't want to get blown off of our pair. I check back. The river is the deuce of spades, giving us a highly unlikely 2-pair. Under the gun may think that we've completely missed the board. He bets 1,000. I consider raising, but I'm not sure there are many worse hands that can call us, and the flush possibility is somewhat scary. I call figuring that we're best. I show the 7 deuce because I don't want to slow roll the opponent. He reveals that he has ace-10 offsuit. He made a speculative call pre-flop that happened to be correct. We improved, and he turned his hand into a bluff. We've caught a ton of people trying to steal our cookies today, perhaps more than any other high-stakes session. We win the main pot and an additional $200 bonus from everyone at the table. We've got a beautiful stack of almost 45,000 in front of us. We're only in for 20,000, so we've recovered everything that we lost from the session before and some extra profit to go with it. In this one, we've got Jack-10 offsuit in the big blind. Under the gun +1 raises to 200. The hijack is a new player. He got stacked his first hand at the table, but he's ready to step in the batter's box again. He calls. We're getting a discount with the hand that can make the best possible straight 4 different ways. I call for 150 more. 3 of us are seeing a flop and we're out of position. It comes Jack-8-3 rainbow. Not bad, we've got top pair and a backdoor straight draw. I check. The initial pre-flop raiser is concerned about something. He checks. The hijack probably doesn't have much. He checks back. Our top pair is likely best. The turn is the 6 of spades. There's a flush draw and a few straight draw possibilities. I bet 400 for value and for protection. The initial pre-flop raiser may have a hand with 2 spades. He calls. The hijack is a recreational player who might be steaming after immediately getting stacked. He raises to 1,400. His line just doesn't make a ton of sense after he checked back the flop. This feels like a semi-bluff with some kind of combo draw. The only good hand I think that hijack would play this way is a turn set, but it's rare that someone smashes the 2-outer. I don't hate the idea of folding, particularly with another player who put money in post-flop. I'm just confident enough to continue in order to see what develops. I call for 900 more. Under the gun +1 isn't quite sure what's happening here. He calls to see a river though. I really don't want to see a spade or overcard. The river is the 8 of hearts pairing the board. Sets and 2-pair combos from our opponents have become even less likely because another 8 is accounted for. I check. Under the gun +1 checks. The hijack shows some heart as he bets 3,000. I didn't believe the story he was telling on the turn, and I don't believe him now. I'm almost positive under the gun +1 has a missed flush draw, so I'm not worried about him having us beat. It feels like the hijack has something along the lines of Queen 10 or 10-9 that missed. I dip into my bluff catching fund that's at an all-time high after picking off more players than Yadier Molina. I call. Under the gun +1 doesn't have much of a decision. He folds. Unfortunately, we don't get the result that we wanted. The hijack indeed has pocket 6s for a turn set that improved to a boat on the river. It's about the only hand that makes sense for the hijack to be betting for value. Sometimes you run into it, as I did here. I lose close to 5,000 in this hand alone. We're still up plenty though. Next we pick out pocket kings on the button. A different new player sits down and raises to 300 from under the gun +1. We've got the second best starting hand permissible under standard poker rules. If you made your way here after watching my second channel about training high-end cats and you're not entirely sure what's going on with all the cards and chips, just know that we're in good shape. I 3-bet to 1,000 in order to isolate the opponent. Under the gun +1 calls for 700 more, we're heads up in position. The flop comes 9-4-3 with 2 diamonds, we've got an overpair with a backdoor flush draw. Under the gun +1 checks, there isn't much to be worried about on this flop. I downbet to 800 in order to try to keep the opponent in with a wide range of hands consisting of medium and high pocket pairs that didn't improve on the flop, as well as some high card combinations that are drawing slim. Under the gun +1 calls, the pot's a sizable one, the turn is the 6 of spades. As long as our opponent didn't hit a set of 6s again, it should be a blank. Under the gun +1 checks, he showed interest on the flop, maybe he has top pairs, something like jacks or 10s. Those combos will be willing to call even bigger bets. I put out 2,000. The opponent was cool calling a flop bet, but he doesn't want to stick around any longer. He folds, we win a nice 3-bet pot, it's just not quite as much as I'd hoped on a good board for our overpair. 4 hours in, we're dealt 7 deuce offsuit once again, we're on the button. Under the gun raises to 200. The cutoff is the opponent that we beat the last time we won with 7 deuce. He 3-bets to 600. Folding to the 3-bet isn't a bad option. In fact, it's probably the best option. We've already seen a lot of aggression. Under the gun and the cutoff could both have premium hands. I just can't help myself though, especially when we've got profit to play with. I cold 4-bet to 2,000, kicking things up a notch. I don't 4-bet very often, and my image is pretty solid today. Under the gun folds. The cutoff isn't as accommodating. He calls for 1,400 more. We're heads up in position in a big pot with absolute trash. The flop comes Queen Jack 3 with 2 clubs. No surprise, we don't connect all that well. The cutoff checks. Flops that come Queen Jack high are going to crush his 4-bet calling range. He can have queens, jacks, ace queen, ace king, etc. But I can have those hands too, along with aces and kings. I take one stab at it, betting 1,400 to try to fold out a hand like pocket 10s. If we get any resistance, I'm not going to triple barrel off. The cutoff calls, which is scary. I wouldn't be shocked if he has the nuts or second nuts. The turn is the 8 of diamonds, doesn't change a whole lot, we've still got air. The cutoff checks. I shouldn't have put any money into this pot to start. I check back to avoid losing any additional money. The river is the king of spades, it's actually another high card that's good for my range as the cold 4-better. The cutoff checks. It's enticing to make one last attempt to try to steal this one, but it's too likely that we're up against something that'll call us down. I give up and check back. The opponent turns over pocket 9s to win way too much money with 4th pair. That's the exact type of holding that I would have expected to fold to our flop bet, but we couldn't get him off of it, and his tenacity gets rewarded. I've lost several thousand back from the high point today. It's important to book a win in order to restore the bankroll and some confidence. Time to head out with over 14,000 in profit. That's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Helps out the channel a ton. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know in the comment section. I'm happy to get back to you. Join us on July 26th at our brand new lodge property in San Antonio. We're having our first meetup game there since taking over. Andrew and I actually did a meetup game there when it was called Rounders, I think about 5 years ago, but me, Andrew, and Doug are all gonna be there, and we're playing 1-2 at 2 p.m. I have more information in the description box below, but if you're in the area, come hang out, have some fun, and hopefully I'll see you there. All right, guys, good luck at the tables, and I'll see you next time.